Hi everybody, my name is Sharon Gray, and I welcome all of you, and I'm so glad that you're here to listen to this. And I volunteered to do this presentation, and it just kind of hit me this week while I was putting this together, this whole presentation, that I didn't really realize how much I knew. And I've started reading Buddhism in about 1978 when I was in college in San Antonio. And I read Alan Watts, and at that time, he was the only person that was writing anything in English about Buddhism. And he was into Zen. And there weren't people that were English speakers writing that stuff, but there were people that were born in the early 40s that are pre-baby boomers that went over to India and China and Tibet and became monks and really learned this stuff. So now we have new translations of all of the Tripitaka, which is the 3 baskets, which is the 4 volumes of stuff that Buddha actually said, because when he died, they had an oral tradition and all these followers listened to him, and as soon as he died, they wrote it all down on palm leaves in a language called Pali, which is very old. It's not as, I don't think it's as old as Sanskrit, but anyway, so I've got the actual volumes of the actual stuff Buddha said. So, and I've got some other books, and I've got some other items I'm going to show you. But anyway, I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to give you some historical background. And we have the Indus Valley. Okay, that is on the west side of India. There's a river, and there's a river there that you can see, and it's on the west side of India, and it's in Pakistan, near Afghanistan, and that was the Indus Valley civilization. And these are some artifacts I've dug up. You see this seal or whatever it is with a cow on it, and various symbols, and you've got sculptures of people, and then up at the top there's a little toy cart for a kid to play with a horse on it, and a man, and a little cart with wheels that turn. And then that's a statue. Those are ruins of what they dug up. And those are some of the ornaments they made out of, I guess those are made out of shell, I'm not sure. And I think it was Bronze Age, so they could do metalworking and make some fairly sophisticated things. And so then after that, in 1500 to 300 BCE, that was the Vedic period, and the Vedas were written in, the Rig Veda and the Bhagavad Gita and all those Hindu epics. And so the Aryans invaded the Indus Valley, and so they took over. They were light-skinned Indo-Europeans, and they were very big into the caste system that the Hindus had, and they were big into organization, temples, kings, all that kind of stuff, whereas the Indus Valley, they haven't found any evidence of temples or palaces or kings. So that sounds like a non-hierarchical society to me. And so eventually they merged together, and they took things from each other. And, well anyway, Indus Valley, Vedic, Aryan culture. Then we have the life of Siddhartha Gautama the Buddha. And he was born a prince. He was born in Lumbini, Nepal, which is far northern India. He was born around 560 BCE, and his father was a king, or at least a ruler of an area, and it was the Sakya clan, S-A-K-Y-A, the Sakya clan, which is why Buddha is called Shakyamuni Buddha. That comes from that, as an honored one of the Sakya clan. And his father was Suddhodana, king of the Sakya people, and his mother Maya died 6 days after his birth, and he was raised by his aunt. At age 16, he married Yasodhara, and they had a son later named Rahula, and Rahula means fetters or chains. And apparently nobody knows what happened to him. So yes, here's the Aryan civilization. Agrarian society, we have Hinduism, we have the Vedas, and we have influencing Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. So that's the general area. And Mohenjo-Daro is a ruin that was excavated as a city. And that's the Mahadevi temple, and that was erected over the place where Buddha was born. And it's called Mahadevi because his mother's name was Maya, so that honors his mother. And when he was born, his father asked Asita to come look at the child. So his father was Suddhodana, his mother was Maya. Asita was the hermit sage who perceived a great man, and he perceived 32 characteristics of a great man, and he said that he would be a great ruler by the time he was 29, or a great king, and if he was, if he went into religious life, he would be an ascended master, or he would be an enlightened person, and that's what this hermit sage guy said when he was born. And Asita said that he was lamenting that when he was already 90 years old, so he would not live long enough to hear the Buddha become enlightened and start teaching. And his father was worried about him. He wanted him to stay inside the palace, didn't want him to go outside and do anything. And when he was a kid, he went outside the palace walls, and as a young boy, he saw a bird pecking at an earthworm and an eagle swooping down on the bird. He came to understand that living beings kill one another, and only the strongest survive. He rescued a swan in the forest that had been injured by men. He understood that all beings wish to live, and all have the right to live. And he was very deeply affected by these creatures, and how tragic it was. So his father was still concerned about him finding out about the outside world. So he went out when he was older, and he saw an old man, and so he learned that it's the nature of man to get old. He saw a sick man. He saw that it was the nature of man to get sick. He saw a dead man. He saw that it was the nature of man to die. Okay, so by this time he's having a crisis. He's seeing reality outside the palace walls, not inside where everything's cushy and Daddy wants him to stay. Okay, so he saw a monk who was very calm and composed, and that gave him a clue that possibly a spiritual approach to life would be better for him. So he studied with a whole lot of, Rahula was the son, and that means fetters. He was born when Siddhartha was 29, and after Rahula was born, Siddhartha left the palace at night on a white horse and said, I'm going to find out what reality is. And he went to many teachers, and he learned from many teachers. So then he started sitting under a tree and being an ascetic and tormenting himself. And then he realized, well, that doesn't work because the middle way is better.
Wait, what was that again?
The middle way was better. It was better not torture yourself.
Okay.
And so he got very weak because he was depriving himself of food and creature comforts. So so he was in a village, and he accepted a bowl of milk from a village girl, and he'd been fasting, and he was very weak. And he regained his strength and meditated under a Bodhi tree, and that's the Bodhi tree in Sarnath that he meditated under. And he stayed there for 35 days, and he saw hundreds and hundreds of his past lives, and that's where he got enlightened one morning. And he wasn't sure if he could teach people or if people would understand. And a god came down from heaven named Brahma Sahampati. And Brahma Sahampati came down and uttered a verse in praise of the Buddha, and then added another verse, and exhorting the Buddha to preach the doctrine as there were those who would understand. And that's a statue of Brahma Sahampati. And apparently if you're a god and your name is Brahma, you are one of the supreme rulers. And so he was called the Buddha, he was called the perfectly enlightened one, he was called the honored one of the Sakya clan, he was the world honored ones. He spoke his teachings to his 5 former companions. At first they shunned him, and then they became the first 5 monks. And there is a Bodhi Gaya temple that was erected. That's rather large. It's 100 and something feet high. And that was erected where the Bodhi tree was, or nearby, where he became enlightened. So, and it's called, the Bodhi tree area is called the Deer Park, because there were deer roaming around. And eventually his whole family started following him. His estranged wife, and his son, and his father, and his aunt, and his whole family did that. And so he preached for 45 years. When he was 80, he predicted that he would fall ill. And I've also read that he got a hold of some bad mushrooms. And so he was teaching in great pain for 3 months and entered peri-nirvana, which is completed enlightenment. And his remains were cremated. He died at Kusinara, and that's the rock that he was cremated on. And they erected the Maha Peri-Nirvana temple, which is on the place that he died. And if Peri-Nirvana is completed enlightenment, then Maha is, I suppose, ultimate enlightenment, because Maha means big or great. Like there's a Raj that's a king, and a Maharaj is a higher king. So he was, when he died, he was on his right side with his hand up against his head, and that is why you see reclining Buddhas. And that's in the temple I just showed you that had the arches in it. So that's the reclining Buddha that's made out of red sandstone. And there's another picture of a reclining Buddha. But anytime you see one of those, that's the position in which he died, so that's why that's a big deal. And now there are 500 million Buddhists in the world, and he said that the true doctrine is not the Buddhas alone, that all reasonably and everlasting doctrines are considered to be Buddhist principles. And there's a large statue in Japan, and that's a Buddha making mudras. Mudras are hand signals. And that's the Jade Buddha, that's the Buddha in the Jade Buddha temple in Houston that I used to go to, and that is a very large porcelain figure. And they also have a Kuan Yin room, and that's where the English-speaking people show up. But he made a lot of far-seeing statements. He said space has no end, and there are endless number of worlds. He talked about endless lives in this world and other worlds. He said nothing is unchangeable, as in matter and energy being converted to each other. He said that in the time it took him to finish a sermon, thousands of years had passed in another world. So he was basically ahead of Isaac Newton. And Albert Einstein praised Buddhism as a cosmic religion. And, quote, "The religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogmas and theology, covering both the natural and the spiritual. It should be based on a religious sense, arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual as meaningful unity." Buddhism answers this description. And there have been many other intellectuals that have been very appreciative of Buddhism, like H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds, and Bertrand Russell, who was a famous mathematician and philosopher, Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, and Carl Jung, who basically invented psychiatry along with Sigmund Freud. And The principles of Buddhism are such that everything happens because of causes and conditions, known as dependent arising. That's the law of cause and effect. And all things undergo formation, existence, destruction, and void. Living beings undergo birth, aging, illness, and death. The law of cause and effect says that matter is void, void is matter, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. And void and emptiness do not mean void, they mean constantly changing, is that it is in the nature of everything living and everything non-living to decay and fall apart. So we should not cling to worldly desires, according to the Buddha. We should not try to remove them totally, which is why we have the middle way. And we have the Four Noble Truths, which is the starting point. There's the truth of suffering. We have to look beneath the surface of the pleasures to the clinging and attachment. We have to break free from the 5 aggregates of clinging, the 5 skandhas: form, matter, feeling, sensation, perception, identification, mental formation and volition, and consciousness. Form and feeling come together to produce a mental sensation. Consciousness connects from and senses and creates awareness. Perception identifies the object and labels it. Mental formations bring back memories as wholesome or unwholesome. Volition ultimately makes a decision as to what action to take. Number 2, the origin of suffering. What is the noble truth of the origin of suffering? It is craving, which produces repeated existence, which is bound up with delight and lust, and seeks delight here and there, that is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for annihilation. Psychological craving is sorrow, fear, worry, grief, and distress. Craving is the motion beneath the round of repeated existence. It is the innermost engine that keeps samsara in perpetual motion. Samsara is the continued rebirth in the world and suffering as a human being that people go through in their round of rebirth. Samsara is the physical world. When the body perishes and breaks up, craving can no longer use it as a vehicle. Craving drives the stream of consciousness forward towards a new body. The main conditions for rebirth are craving and ignorance. The consequences of both ignorance and craving are more rebirth and suffering. Craving, backed up and nurtured by ignorance, is called the origin of suffering. Number 3, the cessation of suffering is nirvana, or nibbana in Pali, nirvana in Sanskrit. First, at the psychological level, the mind is released from the fever of passions and attains dispassion. Freed from sorrow, it becomes sorrowless. Freed from all bonds, it enjoys supreme peace, the inward state of the arahant, the worthy one. That's one of the words for an enlightened person or enlightened being. There are many words for that. Second, at the biological level, the round of rebirth is broken. Only the deathless element remains: the unborn, the unmade, the unbecome, and the unconditional. And so forth. The way to the cessation of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. So there's the way to the cessation of suffering, the Eightfold Path. Okay, the Noble Eightfold Path. Number 1 is right view, understanding karma and its fruits. Higher view is understanding the Four Noble Truths. Right view is what is real and true. Karma means volitional action. It's cause and effect. The unwholesome roots of karma are greed, aversion, and delusion. The wholesome roots are non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion. Second, we have right thought, right intention, development of pure and kind thoughts only. Understanding the nature of desire, counteract ill will with metta, which is loving kindness. Meditation on loving kindness, intention of goodwill, intention of harmlessness. 3 is right speech, respect for the truth and respect for the welfare of others. Avoid lying, gossip, and slander. 4, right action, respect for life, property, and personal relationships. Abstain from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Carry on good and law-abiding conduct. 5, right livelihood. earning a living without violating the principles of moral conduct, respecting truth, life, property, and personal relationships. To be avoided, dealing in weapons, dealing in living beings, animals for slaughter and prostitution, in meat production and butchery, in poisons and intoxicants, practicing deceit, treachery, soothsaying, trickery, and usury. 6, right effort, diligence, exertion, and unflagging perseverance, cultivating a positive attitude and have enthusiasm in the practice of the Dharma. The Dharma is the truth or the teaching. 7, right mindfulness, being mindful of our thoughts and conduct. 8, right concentration, focusing our attention on the object without the mind being distracted. Okay, then we have Buddhism and Hinduism influencing each other. In the 9th century, Buddha was incorporated into Hinduism. Buddha was declared to be the 9th incarnation of Vishnu. Instead of saying, oh, we don't like Buddha, that's not like our religion, they said, no problem, he's the 9th incarnation of Vishnu, cool. Which I find unique in religions in the world. And the Muslims invaded northwest India in 1001, destroying Buddhist temples, libraries, paintings, and statues. They slaughtered thousands of innocent monks. In 1193, the Muslims attacked and conquered Magadha, the heartland of Buddhism, and it's wiped out, which is why there's not a whole lot of Buddhism in India today. Then we have different sects. There are different flavors. Theravada is the original. And it was formerly known as Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle to enlightenment, lesser vehicle. And the goal is to get liberation for yourself only. And around the 1st century AD, a new group emerged. It's called Mahayana, greater vehicle. Mahayana has deities. Mahayana is the teaching that can lead all people to enlightenment. It assumes that bodhisattvas and Buddhas, enlightened beings, can give the liberation seeker help from outside. Whereas Theravada stresses the monastic life, the monk's life on the sole path to salvation, the Mahayana school says anyone, including laity, can attain enlightenment by practicing the bodhisattva values. The Mahayana tradition thus includes numerous bodhisattva saviors. It also includes numerous Buddhas, with the historical Buddha considered just one among many other Buddhas. The bodhisattva concept was vigorously promoted and politicized by Mahayana adherents to differentiate it from the Theravada concept of arhat. The arhat is also an enlightened being, but according to Mahayana believers, the arhat possesses an inferior, selfishly attained enlightenment, one based on benefiting self. In contrast, the bodhisattva are motivated entirely by compassion, by the desire to benefit others. Now, Mahayana is Chinese, and the temple that I used to go to in Houston is Chinese. It's Mahayana. And there are a bunch of deities in Mahayana. Basically, the only deity you have in Theravada is Buddha. And in Mahayana, there are a lot of other deities. Medicine Buddha, who is this guy that's blue. He heals all ills of body and spirit, including ignorance, and reigns over the pure. Lapis lazuli, paradise in the east. And if you notice about what makes him different, besides his blue skin, if you look at, see that plant? He's got a plant in his hand. And he also has a sprout from his other hand, like there's a plant coming out of his wrist. So that's like healing herbs. And then there is Kuan Yin. Now, Kuan Yin is a biggie. Kuan Yin is the bodhisattva of compassion, the enlightened being of compassion, and she is she who hears the cries of the world. And she's kind of an intercessor, kind of like the Virgin Mary. And that is called a royal ease, when she's got one knee up and she's just hanging out. And there's a statue of a white Kuan Yin. And that's Maitreya. Maitreya is the Buddha of the future. And before I started studying Mahayana, I didn't know that there was more than one Buddha. But there have been thousands of past enlightened beings, before Buddha and also after Buddha. And Maitreya is the guy that's the Buddha of the future. And he's also called Amitabhas and Amitabha and Amitayas. So here's all this stuff here. We've got Medicine Buddha, Kuan Yin, Maitreya, and then we have green, white, and red Taras. And there's a green Tara statue. That's a white Tara. And that's a red Tara. And they are very prominent in Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan is kind of an outgrowth of Mahayana. And then you have Zen. Zen was founded in the 6th century, and it stresses direct perception of one's own mind with the practice of meditation. Now that's what Alan Watts was writing about, was Japanese meditation when he was around. There's Tibetan, there's Diamond Way and Tantric, and those are presided over by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama. And then there's Pure Land, and Pure Land is like this idealized heaven. Realms created by the compassion of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, where beings may aspire to be born in order to complete the path to enlightenment under many more propitious circumstances. There are many Buddhas and many Pure Lands. And now I'm going to talk about modern teachers. There's Thich Nhat Hanh, Alan Watts. Now he's the guy that I was reading in the 70s. So he was an Anglican minister. He was British, and he became an Anglican minister and was ordained as an Anglican minister. And then he moved to Chicago and was a minister there. And then he started studying Buddhism and was fascinated with it. And he ended up living on a houseboat in Berkeley and being a hippie guru type, wearing Japanese clothes. So anyway, there's Ram Dass. Now, Ram Dass used to hang out with Timothy Leary. And Timothy Leary was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Med School. And Ram Dass was his friend, and Ram Dass's name was Richard Alpert. And then he decided to get into Buddhism. And he's written some very classic books like Be Here Now and Grist for the Mill. And so he's still around. He's 86 years old, but in the early 60s.
He died several years ago. He had a stroke.
He had a stroke?
He had a stroke 10 years ago.
Oh. Huh.
He was a quadriplegic for a while.
Huh.
And, well, I guess he had a stroke maybe 12, 13 years ago. I think he died maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. But he's written some good books that I've read. And that's Pema Chodron, who is a lady from Ireland. Her real name is Deirdre. And she's written good books. She's written one that I have called When Things Fall Apart, which is advice about what to do when you're in pain and things are bad. And she's very well loved. And that's the Dalai Lama, who said the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. He was born in 1935, and he's from a Tibetan lineage from, I don't know, 1200, 1400, something like that. And then he had to get out of Tibet in 1959 because China invaded and took over. And now they have said that they've selected another kid to be the next Dalai Lama, and the Tibetans that follow the Dalai Lama say, no, this isn't the right kid to be the successor. So they don't know what's going to happen after the Dalai Lama dies. He's pretty old. And he was born in 1936. So the interesting thing about Tibetan Buddhism is that the United States sent food aid to India back in the 1960s, and after the Dalai Lama had to leave Tibet and the Chinese took over, that galvanized a whole lot of people in the West about Buddhism, And in exchange for providing food aid to India, the Tibetans were required to provide copies of their scriptures and all of their holy books. And those all went to the Library of Congress. So all this Tibetan stuff is at the Library of Congress now, which is cool. Lama Ole Nidal, he's from Denmark. Lama Surya Das, I think he's an American guy. John Brahm, he's British, you can tell by the bad teeth. He lives in Australia now. I know I shouldn't say things like that about British people. But, okay. And we have this little diagram here called the Wheel of Existence. And anyway, that's Buddha up in the top right. That's Buddha, there's the moon over there. And this is some monster thing. And it has all this stuff about the life cycle and being born and getting old and dying and being reincarnated. And the black and white in the center, those are the 6 realms in which you can be reborn. And the top left one is gods. And gods are not perfect and they're still unhappy. And there are demigods that are slightly lower and they're still not happy. And then there's human beings, and those are considered to be good rebirths. And on the right side in the black, we have animals, since you see an ox in there, an ox, excuse me. And then you have the hell beings, and they're unhappy all the time. And at the bottom, those are the hungry ghosts. And the hungry ghosts have long arms and skinny legs and fat bellies, and they have little bitty mouths so they can never get enough food, they can never be satisfied. So those are the 6 possible slots you can land in when you're reborn. And, okay, there's a book by the Dalai Lama, The Wheel of Life. Buddhist perspective on cause and effect. So that's another version of the same thing. I find this picture to be totally fascinating because of all the details it has. And now I'm going to go to ritual items. Okay, that is a giant prayer wheel. And a prayer wheel has scriptures written on it in Sanskrit, and there are many, many rolls of them, so it's like a paper towel roll, only thicker. And these are on this roll, and when you turn the prayer wheel counterclockwise, that supposedly sends these prayers and mantras to heaven, and you get merit from that. And merit is positive potential, it's not actually brownie points. And then we have tonkas. Okay, that's a mandala. Mandala is a round thing that people use to meditate on. And what the monks will do, the Tibetans especially, they will make one of these intricate colored designs with different colored sand and do it on a sidewalk in a public place or in front of their temple. And so they have this thing that's taken them a week to do, and then they sweep it away to remind us of impermanence. And a mantra is a chant which is supposed to help you with difficulties, problems, and there are various chants for various gods and deities. And when you have a mala is 180 beads with a tassel on the end like that. And I'm going to show you some of these things. I have my personal collection of things, and I'm going to show you this stuff when I get through. And that's an that's a mandala with Om in the center. Om is the sacred syllable that everything started from in the universe, according to the Hindus, and it's used a lot in meditation. It's kind of the basic starting point. And here's Krishna Das talking about chanting. Chanting breaks down the difference between the inside and the outside. It's about having a heart that never shuts down, that nothing can shut down, which I think is a lovely quote. And I think I've covered all of that. Now I'm going to get out some of my items.
Should we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a break.